Okay, we have a two-time Oscar-winning actor and producer who narrated the documentary America's Birding, available on Apple TV. Michael Douglas, like I have to tell you, came back to see us. And he's Puck's chief political columnist and national news analyst for MSNBC and NBC News. John Heilemann is here. And she is the senior editor of The Dispatch and host of their legal podcast, Advisory Opinion, Sarah Isgur. Okay. I'm going to get right to the most important question people asked. Michael, what's been your experience with intimacy coordinators? There it is. Now, if you don't know what it is, what is an intimacy coordinator?
Intimacy coordinators came along. The Me Too movement was to have, in terms of sex scenes or intimate scenes, have somebody there to control.
You can say fuck on this show.
Okay. It wasn't just that. But we never had that when I was.
And was there any problem?
No, there wasn't. I've never had any problem with that at all. But it's a little it's a little weird. Well, I mean, we would work things out. I remember with Fatal Attraction. You know, we had Glenn close up on the kitchen. And,
I remember, yeah.
And on the kitchen counter and this and that, and Adrian said, "Do you have any ideas?" And Glenn said, "Well, what about if I lean back and turn the water on?" Yeah, and then my fingers to the water, get my fingers all wet, and I stick them in your mouth. Said, that might work. Said, that might work. The secret I always found is you just don't surprise the actress, the leading lady. So if you tell her before, I'm going to touch you here, kiss, kiss. I'm going to touch you here.
Do you ever learn one of those things like the water thing and then bring it home?
Every chance I get.
Because every time I hear an actor talk about sex scenes, they always say the same thing. It's the least sexy thing you could ever do. Which makes sense. You got all these bright lights, all these people watching.
Standing around, yeah.
I mean, George C. Scott had the great line. He supposedly said to the actress, "I apologize if I get an erection, and I apologize if I don't."
No, I don't agree.
All right. Do the Democrats need a social media platform, this is for you, John, of their own to combat the Republican influence on Twitter? Well, I mean, I don't know, but Twitter, it's funny. It used to be completely left. Then Elon said, I'm going to take it over, so it's going to be 50-50 right down the middle. He didn't do that. It just switched completely. So I don't know. It's terrible that I think that we have our own media silos. We need places where, like this show, but there's not enough of them, where everybody comes and everybody hears everybody else from all points of view.
I'd like to steal a line from Dave Chappelle, who said at some point how he doesn't know very much about what goes on Twitter because he doesn't go on Twitter because Twitter's not a real place. That's sort of how I feel about Twitter. And Twitter, not only is Twitter not a real place, but it's become a toxic cesspool filled with nothing, not about right, it's not about conservative, it's just filled with misinformation, disinformation, and conspiracy theories. So I would rather not have the left replicate that if that's what's required. I think the deeper question that the question's getting at is that if you look at the data in this election, the amount of reach of all of these alternative, I'm talking about the whole podcast space mostly, but also social media. The interviews that Trump did, not starting with Rogan, but Theo Vaughn and all of these other things he did, incredible reach compared to old mainstream media, right? Where, you know, the number of people that Kamala Harris reached by going and talk to Brett Baer is a tiny fraction of, if you look at the average, not just the number of downloads, but then the social media plays on YouTube and other places that Trump did by hitting all of those mostly bro-friendly, skewing young male podcast platforms. I think the issue is not so much that the left, quote, needs a platform. There are a bunch of people on, Harris went on Call Her Daddy, right? All the Smoke, a few of those things. What the left has to, what Democrats have to figure out is the fact that the way to talk to voters who are not our age, and the large swelling number of the segment of young voters and middle-aged voters, is that they have to start talking to them on platforms that are not 60 Minutes and Fox News or MSNBC or any of these, I hate to say it, dying legacy media platforms, when the way to reach the growing parts of the electorate is through.
But isn't that another way of saying that Twitter is real?
Well,
the internet is real. Somebody just wrote a big article about this. Like,
well,
that is where reality
real.
is now, and this is perfect for the movie you're going to do.
No, really, this is exactly. I hope you're taking notes.
I'm taking notes. I'm taking
In
notes.
the place of bipartisan agreement, remember, Congress actually passed a ban, so to speak, that TikTok has to divest from China, for instance. Basically, by the end of this year, it's withstood court scrutiny so far, but I fear that we're heading towards a real clash between, you mentioned, various social media platforms rat-fucking our kids' minds, becoming incredibly addictive, and the First Amendment and free speech, which I know you also care a great deal about. And how do we deal with this? We have not done anything to deal with it. We've just been like, it's partisan. This side's for me and that side's for me. Forget all of that. The problem is that we have kids committing suicide because they're on these social media platforms and AI that's talking back to them and they think it's a person.
Right, yeah.
Those are their relationships.
Those are their relationships. I also think everything the candidates, especially the Democrats, do to get voters annoys them. The constant texting. Did you get the texts like from Tim Walz every 5 minutes, and the, like always begging for money and knocking on doors? We've got people knocking on doors. People don't want knocking on your door. Who in this day and age wants someone knocking on? Kids don't even like it when a phone call. That's like too much of a invasion of their privacy, which they don't care about. Who might emerge as the strongest Democratic opposition leader in the next Trump era? Oh, well, that's a good question. I mean, like Adam Schiff, he won right big.
He won, but I like Wes Moore.
Wes Moore's fantastic. He's in Maryland.
Yep.
But who's going to be the one? Gavin Newsom, we have here in this state. He's already like called the legislature to.
I mean,
Trump hasn't done anything yet, but I understand the.
This was the problem. You know, there was a 2014 study that showed that Fortune 500 companies were more likely to pick a female CEO if the company was struggling, basically setting women up for the big job, but to also fail. If they did well, fine. But if they failed, like, look, we have a female CEO while failing. And that's what I feel like they did to Kamala Harris. When Biden refused to step aside and not run again, he was supposed to be that bridge. He backed off on that promise due to arrogance. And then he drops out after a catastrophic debate performance, and they set Kamala Harris up to fail. That was a 3-month campaign, and she was supposed to introduce herself to the American people. No wonder people were Googling, did Joe Biden drop out? And so...
No. No. You're saying 3 months wasn't long enough?
It was too long.
It was long enough.
It was long enough.
If they had a primary...
It's not that they didn't have time to introduce. They met someone and didn't like them.
If they had had a primary, they wouldn't have picked her. And if they had,
That's
she would have been
different.
able to
Yes.
rough out those edges that then she basically has to start from scratch with a campaign team she didn't hire that didn't like her, right? It was his team. And so I wonder if that next Democratic person, maybe someone's not even on our radar yet. Because frankly, when you look at the history of who's, there's two types. The one who waited in line, who was next in line, and then there's the one who comes out. That's Obama, that's Clinton, that's Reagan to some extent.
We got a strong bench. There's a very strong bench. There's a number of people that could be possibilities.
You're talking about people like Josh Shapiro, who could have been the vice president
Senator
and won
from Connecticut.
Pennsylvania.
Senator
Blumenthal?
No.
Oh,
Chris
Murphy.
Chris Murphy.
Yeah.
I'm going to side with Sarah about this one thing. If you're the sitting vice president for a president who has, throughout his entire term in office, been sitting at about somewhere between a 35 and 40% approval rating. People view the Biden administration as a failure. We can have a long discussion about whether they are right about that, about the economy, but the perceptions of the economy were that people thought inflation was too high, people thought we were on the wrong track, 75% wrong track numbers, and this huge inflation overhang. You're the sitting vice president, and you get put on elevated to the top of the ticket 107 days ahead of the election. I think that is a very high degree of difficulty to put on anybody, and I do not think she is the perfect candidate. I tend to agree with Sarah that probably in a fully litigated primary, she probably would not have been the Democratic nominee, but we'll never know that. But I will tell you that, like, There's never been anybody who's had the difficulty of that situation, elevated
Why?
that late in the campaign.
A
Why?
Democrat would have needed to run away from
Bill,
the
I don't know if you know
Biden
this, but the Vice
administration.
President of the United States
How
is
is she
basically
supposed to do
shoved in a broom closet for 3.5 years.
I know.
Like, you couldn't.
She was more popular in there.
Yes, well,
I mean, this idea that the idea in a mass media age that 107 days is not long enough to know somebody.
you are way overestimating the American people in terms of what their
No,
ability.
no.
You have someone like Donald Trump has become a universally known, understood, loved by some, hated by others over the course of being omnipresent
Yeah.
for 8 years.
Decades.
Okay.
Barack Obama becomes president of the United States after running for 2 years as president, runs a 50-state primary, is on television, does dozens of Democratic debates, and by the time at the end of that, most people knew who he was. Most people.
Yeah.
You drop somebody into the
Okay,
middle of
okay,
the top of the
but
ticket,
John-
3 days out, 3 months out. You are going to have to spend a lot of time trying to introduce yourself
Okay.
to the country while also being in a steel cage death match with Donald Trump.
Okay, but I don't know if you ever watched this show, but I had Michael Douglas on this week.
Yeah.
At the top, we were talking about this, and he made a very good point that every other country in the world can do it in months, sometimes weeks. Why can every other country do it in that short a period of time? Are they all that so much brighter than America? I don't think so.
Well,
Mostly parliamentary. I mean, there's like literal reasons, right? We don't have a
But it's
parliamentary
the-
system.
I mean,
we also have a First Amendment. We don't make people campaign this whole time. The American people want to give them $20, and so they can afford it. I mean, small dollar donors are arguably the worst thing that's happened to our politics, as it turned out.
It's a small dollar donor didn't make $20 billion. No.
A lot of it.
Some of it, yeah.
A lot of it. And they represent about 2% of our country.
There's a few special PACs in there that saw $100 million
those
plus.
are bad too.
I think you can believe that you could have shorter elections in America, but it's not like we don't know. In Britain, for instance, when you have a short election, it's not like you don't know who the leader of the party is for months and years before that.
John, you're either the person who's Googling the day before, did Biden drop out, or you know in a week. You know, did anyone in this audience not know enough about Kamala Harris pretty much after a week to make a decision? No. Yeah, it just people. And
How
it's
are you gonna
ridiculous.
enforce
We just get sicker of them.
What? So
How are you going to tell people
they
they
say
can't
the
talk
same
about politics?
What?
How with free speech that I know you love?
Yeah.
How are you going to limit people's ability to run for office?
I'm not limiting. We're not making a law.
Bill, are you?
Is there somehow
Of
ability
course.
to reduce the amount of money involved
Get
in
rid of
politics?
super PACs by making it no limits, full disclosure. 24-hour disclosure.
We could
should
fix
have
democracy in a
instant
minute. Get rid of gerrymandering. Get rid of money in politics.
Wait, get rid of it. You're not
Get rid of
gonna
the
get rid of
electoral
it. It's
college.
water.
No, none of that is. We're going to keep working with this constipated system that we live with.
Is it just as forget about what system you think is the right system? Is it your contention is that no people were late deciders in the election?
No, they
Nobody
were. I
decided-
talked about them last week.
Right.
Christmas Eve shoppers,
So those
I
people.
called.
So those people apparently needed longer than 90
they would have
days.
been undecided.
They always would have been.
Exactly.
They were always
That's why I call them. I called them, John, I said this last week, I called them Christmas Eve shoppers. My father was one. People who don't buy their presents until the Christmas Eve night he would go into the store. And he wouldn't feel like he could do it until he was fully in the spirit. He had to be in the store on Christmas Eve with Santa and all the fucking elves and everything that was going on. And then he would make his decision. You can give those people 10 years. Really.
Okay.
I'll tell you, the Lego store already has their Christmas ornaments out. I went today. I've got them.
These are
Not
all
a Christmas Eve shopper.
Why you have to make all these excuses for her? This, like I said, all this was this week was people who said, "Oh, she ran a flawless campaign. How ridiculous!" Or it's sexism, it's racism. This is an old playbook.
Yes, I didn't say any of those things.
I know, but I've heard a lot of these things, and like I think America's perfectly willing to elect a woman. They just didn't like the last two that were put up. I mean, there's some sexism.
I'm not willing to elect a woman where she's the best candidate that they're offered. That's that simple.
I think they are not. I think they were very unlikely to elect whether the vice president to Joe Biden who had a
that's it.
who had a
That's what they didn't like.
The
They
vice
pushed her
president
off the
to Joe
glass
Biden,
cliff.
whether it was a male, female, black, white, or anything
And
else,
she didn't
was
make a
going to
good-
have a giant political albatross around their neck, and they could perform perfectly or perform imperfectly.
She didn't
But
make
that
it-
person was going to be at a disadvantage.
She didn't make a good case.
Well-
She didn't denounce the past stuff that people didn't like. She just
What would you do
tried to
differently than
ignore
Joe
it.
Bidden? I can't think of anything. And she was offered a
Yes,
redo on that.
that was
Nope.
terrible.
That
That
really
would,
hurt.
that would hurt.
That one hurt.
And the
She
focus
should
on
have been
democracy was little high, thinking that the abortion thing was the thing, but Trump neutralized the whole abortion thing, so the women thing didn't make a difference. And then the guys, the men, geez, just it was unbelievable the dent that Trump put into them.
Several
Given that-
female voters said they were actually pleased that they could divide the decision. They could vote for Trump and vote for a ballot measure that was pro-choice. So they felt like they could have their, Trump cake and eat it too. That metaphor went off.
Does anybody
one more.
does anybody on the panel think that given the size of Trump's victory, right? He won,
Yeah.
improved his performance in almost every county in America,
Yeah.
right? Improved from what we saw before as a 47% ceiling. He's now sitting at like 50.5, 51. Does anybody think that anybody else, if you had had a different candidate replacing Joe Biden in August, that person would have turned back that tide on election night? Would have suddenly, all of those Trump gains would have gone away and they would have won the election?
Yes, if they had been a change candidate who ran away from Biden and could distinguish themselves from Trump and had said, Joe Biden's administration has been a disaster for you and I'm going to have a third way, that yes, a new voice could have done that, but Kamala Harris could not, because she would not distance herself.
She wanted to have it both ways, not lose the woke people who have the energy in the party. All right, one more question. In the wake of Donald Trump's victory, some American women say they are turning to a movement that advocates no sex, dating, or marriage with men and no children. Wow, no sex, dating, marriage, or children.
Then the conservatives will outbreed you.
Right.
Good plan. That's the dumbest fucking thing I've heard.
But we are getting to this place where, because of politics, the men and the women are moving further and further apart. And if they don't want to be together, what's going to happen to
We
the
can
species?
replace y'all
Be like
so
England.
easily.
Why?
Well, I don't know. The men and women seem a little separate there. The women always and the men are going off dilly-dallying around with one person or another.
Yes.
You know,
Well, the men are all gay there. Are
that's,
they? No, they're not all gay there. There's many very strapping heterosexuals like Hugh Grant.
Yeah.
Great leading man.
Not touched.
Right, I know, but... Well, I'm just going to remember, since we have a movie star here, that it was a movie star, George Clooney, who really affected this election. I mean, Biden might still be in there if George Clooney, talk about celebrities and how important they are. I don't think they're important in getting the voters to do something, but they sure were important in getting the party heads to finally do that.
This was another part, I think, of why people didn't trust Harris, because at the same time she's saying, hey, these things I said in 2019 that were kind of like left-wing crazy, I don't mean them anymore. Also, Joe Biden was totally fine, and I have no idea why he dropped out, and I never saw any problem the whole time I was in the White House.
Yeah.
Either you weren't in the room, you weren't paying attention, or you were lying to us, and the gaslighting is so frustrating.
Right, and I called him, I said, like a year before he dropped out, I said, you're going to be Ruth Bader Biden. That's what I kept calling. You're going to be the Ruth Bader Ginsburg of the party. And people just would come up to me, the liberals, the ones who I'm not good enough for anymore because I'm just too concerned. Bill, stop making jokes about Biden's age. You're going to help Trump. Right. Like if I didn't mention it, no one would have noticed. All right, we got to go. Thank you very much. Michael Douglas, thank you for joining us. What a nice surprise. Okay. Oh, I forgot to plug my book. Oh, well.